Name is Marigold Hoare. Born on July the 9th, 1925. I grew up in Chelsea, in Cadogan Gardens. That's my mother and her sister when they were children in India. Well, it was very typical of that era with a beloved nanny and a nursery maid, and it was all, I went to a day school near here. And then about 1937 we moved to the country, which I disliked intensely. Away at school, when France fell and the headmistress coming in, we were assembled and the headmistress came in, tears rolling down her cheeks, and said, "France has fallen." And we didn't quite understand what it meant or the importance of it, but we were very upset at seeing her crying, and it was very emotional somehow experience. Both my brother and my father had been in the lifeguards in the army, and I thought I'd do something different and go into the Navy. I was then called up, but actually I had volunteered. I think that was 18 you had to be to go into the Wrens, and they were all volunteers. We weren't conscripted. You were conscripted into the Army or the Air Force, but the Navy had only volunteers. And that was quite a change. Life changed dramatically. Women replaced men so they could go off and fight, which in those days women didn't. And there we were, in a totally different kind of life, completely unprepared for it. There was definitely rules and regulations which you had to either circumvent or follow. I was not a very good Wren. I started off by charging batteries on a Fleet Air Arm station in the Midlands for our planes, you know, for the pilots. And that was a very sort of low kind of grade, you know. I mean, that was the lowest you could get, really. You couldn't get any lower. That went on until I had an accident and fell out of a lorry, and that was then deemed unsuitable. The whole category was unsuitable for women. We couldn't lift the batteries, they were so heavy. We had to have a sailor standing behind us to do the lifting, and it became totally uneconomical, the whole thing. So then I became a fleet mail clerk, and I did a post office training behind the counter. And I chose that because it was the only way you could get abroad, and I was sent to the Far East, to Ceylon, as it was called then, for a year and a half. I don't think I was terribly enthusiastic then about the work. I mean, how can one get enthusiastic about charging batteries or repacking parcels that have been posted to sailors overseas and have come undone in the post, which was mainly my duties. I was asked to a party on board a naval ship, but the Wrens weren't allowed to fraternise with the officers, and so, in fact, I couldn't go to the party. I had a cousin out there who was a nurse, so I borrowed her uniform and went as a nurse. And as I walked up the gangway onto the ship, at the top was my first officer, who looked at me in horror, and I turned round and came off, and I got confined to barracks for 3 weeks for that, and for impersonating another service.
Did you have a wartime sweetheart?
Yes, I did. He was actually killed. He was a submariner, and around about Dunkirk time, he was definitely, I'm afraid, killed during the war. And I had the boyfriends after that, as one did at that age, everybody. We were very spoiled in Ceylon. We were very few women on an island absolutely stuffed with men in various fighting forces waiting to invade Japan. And then the war ended in Japan, the bombs dropped and everything, and so it all came to a natural end. That is Admiral Lord Nelson, probably the most famous naval hero in English history, and I always had him as an inspiration when I was younger. VE Day came, the war ended, and we were repatriated back to England. For returning service women, and men I guess too, quite boring, really. We were, women anyway, were immediately back under the auspices of our family, and that was fairly restrictive in those days. I escaped as soon as I could and came up to London and got some sort of training as a secretary, which everybody did in those days. I think people grow up too quickly these days. The young, probably 14, 15-year-olds, at 17, 18, we were much the same as the 14, 15-year-olds today. And that's a huge difference, really. Life is completely different in every way. I think on the whole, I would say it's evened out. Some things are better, some things are worse.